Hi everyone, welcome to the session. Excited to jump into our topic with you all. So today we're talking about strategic planning and ROI, how to make the most of your security investments. Before we get chatting, I want to introduce the two of us you see on screen here. If you're not familiar with either one of us, my name's Nick Walker. I'm NetSPI's Regional Director of EMEA. I've been a pen tester for over a decade with a specialism in mobile and web application security. I've run and managed regions for some well-known cybersecurity firms and spend a lot of time helping CISOs across Europe building and adapting pen testing programs to fit their needs, depending on where their organization is in terms of maturity. On the weekends, I travel the country taking part in clay shooting competitions and definitely living up to the phrase, it's not the winning, it's the taking part that counts. If you've heard of NetSPI, you've probably heard of the man I'm about to introduce, our field CISO, Nabil Hannan. I'll be asking Nabil quite a few questions today that are top of the mind for so many security leaders. So Nabil, why don't you give us a little bit more information on who you are and what you do?
Thank you for having me today, Nick. I'm really excited to be here. So, hi everyone, Nabil Hannan. I'm the field CISO at NetSPI. I've spent most of my life working in technology and breaking things. I've started coding when I was 7 years old, which also meant I've been breaking things since I was 7 years old, and spent most of my career focusing on various cybersecurity initiatives, but with a heavy focus on application security. Today, I spend most of my time working with CISOs at some of NetSPI's most strategic customers, and I work with them to help them solve challenging problems. So typically, I'm working with them, or they give me a call when they have some sort of a need or a challenge that they don't know how to address. And we partner with them and collaborate with them to see how we can help them solve those problems. I'm not quite as good at skeet shooting like Nick is, but as hobbies, I enjoy playing golf, even though I'm not very good at it. I enjoy the social aspect of it, and in my spare time, as a hobby, I try to make espresso-based drinks.
Thanks, Nabil. Awesome to have you and your expertise on here today to get into the ROI of security investments. This topic's really important, I think, for security professionals and can definitely be a hard one to tackle. So we're going to discuss how we measure the success of a security investment program when, as we all know here, a successful security program really doesn't have much to show, which makes this definitely a challenge across the board. So let me kick us off with our first question. Nabil, as NetSPI's field CISO with nearly 2 decades of experience, could you share what you believe is the most challenging aspect of demonstrating the ROI of security investments?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's a very tough discussion to have, especially because when it comes to determining return on investment, it's very hard to show the return on investment when you don't have something that is actually tangible or a feature or a functionality as a result of your investment. Given that we work in security, security teams are often perceived as cost centers, but in return, it's hard to demonstrate what you're actually getting for that cost. So, if I can use an example, when you have a really strong security posture and you've made the right and proper security investments, ideally you're going to have nothing to show for it. Ideally, you haven't had a breach. Ideally, you're not running into emergency situations or outages. Ideally, you're not having to deal with different types of crises. You hopefully, when you run into situations, you hopefully have a proper business continuity and disaster recovery plan, something that many organizations struggled with, and we kind of had to highlight the importance of that given some recent situations we had with things like CrowdStrike as an example. So those things kind of highlight that if you're making the right investments, ideally nothing's going to happen. But then congruently, if you don't make the right decisions and you don't make the right investments, you're probably going to have a lot of headache and results in things like reputational damage, data breaches and customer challenges, outages in general, and so on. So that's why this is a really challenging problem to tackle, which is why I'm glad we're having the conversation today. But
Yeah.
it's one of those conversations where, given our focus at NetSPI as well, where we do a lot of things like penetration testing as a service, attack surface management, breach and attack simulation, it's one of those things where you have to maintain a program. So investments aren't necessarily just static and upfront. You have to build a program that is also constantly evolving and improving in terms of maturity. So I'll use pen testing as an example. You can't just do one pen test and never pen test again because you did one pen test and maybe did not have any critical or serious issues that were identified. It requires maintenance. It's like you're having to change your batteries, and occasionally you have to make sure you're doing different things to enable you to get different perspectives, getting different lenses and views on the type of things you have to invest in. So it's a challenge, and to properly be able to illustrate ROI, you have to work on making sure that your program is also reaching a certain level of maturity so you can measure different investments that you're making to show an overall improvement in your security posture or overall cybersecurity hygiene across the industry. And I'm sure we'll get more into details of that as well.
Yeah. So I think a good analogy is like a smoke alarm. So it costs money up front for no real visible impact, right? You hope you never need to use it. And until something goes wrong, i.e., you have a fire and it does its job, that's when you see its value. And it's hard in that situation to see value in your investment up front, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it. And like you said, like pen testing too, it also needs maintenance, like battery changes, and occasionally it'll do a lot of beeping and annoying people, just like pen testing can occasionally frustrate devs or feel like it's slowing things down. But nobody would argue that a smoke alarm's not worth it, right?
I have another
So,
analogy that I just came up with recently because I'm in the process of buying a motorcycle. So
oh,
when you buy a motorcycle, for example, I made sure I had ABS on my motorcycle. Now, ideally, if I'm riding the motorcycle correctly and not getting into any trouble, that ABS should never actually be activated. But the moment I start skidding or hit bad weather or hit bad terrain or do something wrong, like brake too hard, the ABS has to come on. So to make sure that's a worthwhile investment. So similar to your smoke alarm thing, hopefully I never have to use the ABS, but it's an investment I'm making for safety purposes.
hopefully. Given the current landscape of cybersecurity threats, why do you think it's more critical than ever for cybersecurity leaders to accurately measure ROI? You touched on that in your previous answer, right? So, what makes this an essential focus for them?
I think when we think about this, I like thinking in terms of looking at recent examples of breaches that have happened that has had broad and wide impact across just not the industry, but maybe across just the human population and the general population. I often think about the Target credit card breach that occurred, where a large number of Target customers' credit card information was stolen. It's um, it's a good example of highlighting the fact that the general population is also at risk because of data breaches and maybe incorrect investment or not enough investment happening in the right way. There are there are often organizations that make investments but don't necessarily focus on building a well-rounded program, and we can talk about that in more detail later. But just doing one thing is usually not enough. You have to think about not just testing, you have to think about training and education around cybersecurity. You have to think about governance and compliance requirements that you have to meet. You have to think about monitoring in production. You have to think about operations, etc. So having to make the right investments everywhere to build a more holistic program and well-rounded program is always better than heavily investing in just one area. I think organizations often fall into this slippery slope where they go year over year and start increasing their budget and spend, but they're increasing their budget and spend, but making the investment in one specific security function. So, for example, they might spend $1 million pen testing this year, and next year they spend $5 million, but also just pen testing that year. It doesn't always really equate to being 5 times more secure just because you made 5 times more investment, because you may not be looking at the problem more holistically. So, what I often tell leaderships is, you're not going to necessarily be able to show anything for the investment because ideally you're not getting breached or you're not having outages because of lack of investment. But if you're able to build out a program that is more holistic, then you can start taking data and information from that program. And the more mature the program gets, the better quality metrics you're able to gather. So, for example, I'll use AppSec example in particular, secure code review and static analysis is a common thing that goes into software development processes to add a security touch point within the lifecycle of software. When you're doing that and monitoring it, when you start doing it, you may not be able to show any good metrics except for coverage. Like, how many applications am I doing this activity on? But as you start doing it across the board holistically and that function matures more, then you might be able to take other data points, such as what is my vulnerability density per line of code, and then look at that trend over time. And the hope is over time, your number of vulnerability density is actually improving and it's becoming much lower, and you can show that positive trend. So as you start building out your program, it's important to remember that you are only going to be able to show your ROI based on the maturity of your program. And the more mature you get, you'll have access to more data points and mature data points that allow you to give better metrics and also make better decisions based on the investments you're making and the type of trends you're seeing as a result of those investments. Another one that I like to talk about is training. Often people say, how do I determine the value of training that we're doing? We've all been through, compliance training and onboarding and IT orientation training. And then there's annual training that we have to do. And I don't know anyone that actually enjoys doing that training. In fact, if anything, I see that people are most of the time just clicking through the training and trying to just complete it and then forget about it for the rest of the year until they have to do it again. But that's where you have to think of things like, well, is that really effective? And if it's not, then do I need to think about gamification of my training and get people more invested in making sure that they're not just taking training and we're not giving them a check mark, check the box that training's completed, but they're actually intaking and absorbing the material to be able to better perform on their day-to-day job on what they're learning and getting training for. So those are just some examples of how, being able to measure things is important, but making sure you're measuring the right things at the right time based on the maturity of your program is also a critical factor.
Do you think there's a situation whereby people could be inclined to stop doing pen tests once they feel like their metrics are in a good place? Like, you're reducing investments in certain areas once they get to a certain, what you'd consider a return on investment.
Well, for my job security, I hope they never stop pen testing, but I have a better answer beyond just job security. Uh, there are programs that end up having different types of security touch points throughout the life cycle or throughout different phases of the environment with defense in depth, etc. But what happens is you still have to look at systems holistically. And you may be doing testing of different types. It may not be a pen test. It may be a code review. It may be a dynamic scan. It may be a software composition analysis. It could be threat modeling, etc. But ultimately, you still need to test your systems holistically. And if you don't look at a system holistically, there are often gaps that end up revealing themselves at a time when it's not very fortunate or at a time when it's not ideal for it to manifest. And I love an example that I have from NASA. I believe it was the Mars rover, the first time it was sent out to land on Mars. And they had tested all the systems individually. So they tested the thrusters that were managing the distance that it would go when you're trying to land. And they tested the computer system that would tell the thrusters how far to go, when to land, but they never tested those systems together. And there was a minor glitch in how the two systems were implemented. They both did exactly what they were supposed to do individually, but when you put them together, the thruster was expecting the distance to go down in something like meters, but the computer telling it, the module telling it how far to go down was giving it the number in feet. So instead of going down 100 feet, it decided to go down 100 meters. And instead of gently landing on the surface of Mars, it actually ended up just crashing into the surface of Mars. And think about what a waste that is after all that investment and all that testing and assurance that NASA goes through to build a system that's going to successfully land on Mars. And yet at the very last minute, you figure out that there was a simple test that could have been done to make sure all of that was working holistically well together, but ultimately it didn't happen. So that's
Yeah,
one example.
it doesn't sound like too much of a minor glitch for me. It's just a particular choice of words there, Nabil. Um,
It's a very major impact, but it's a very
yeah,
simple problem that
yeah,
that
yeah,
resulted in a very very severe impact. The second thing about pen testing that I like to think of as I have matured and understand the landscape better too is I think pen testing for organizations that are maturing in their cybersecurity journey, pen testing should be viewed as a gate or a test to validate the effectiveness of all the other things you're doing before doing a pen test to make sure that those are effective. So ideally, if you're introducing different types of security activities within your overall ecosystem and your life cycle, and they're supposed to catch different types of issues early, and hopefully, because you're catching them, you also work on fixing them. Ideally, when you get to the pen test, you're not finding much. And if you do find things that are real serious issues, then you take that and as a way to learn and provide it as a feedback loop to the program so you can figure out what gaps exist today in your overall life cycle that need to be addressed and make sure you make continuous improvement so that next time that type of an issue doesn't slip or doesn't pass through the other gates that you've implemented already. So even though you may be doing other activities and you get a sense that, hey, I'm doing everything else so well, I don't need a pen test anymore. I still think a pen test is important just as a sanity check to validate that the other controls you've put in are being effective. And then, of course, there are compliance drivers, right? There are compliance reasons and contractually you may be obligated with your customers too to do pen testing. So you may not be able to get away from it unless we have drastic changes in regulations or severe changes in contracts that people have gotten into with their customers.
yeah. In similarity to your Mars rover example, I think in my experience, I've seen a lot of organizations rely on incremental testing in a similar kind of way, testing only code that has changed for a future release, for example, right? And I think that's fine to a point. It gives you a good focused coverage on your changes. But I think it's super important that you also go back on a regular basis and test the whole system as a whole for any regressions or strange side effects that might have occurred in other areas of code outside of the things that you changed in that single feature. Some some accountancy for the assumptions you might have made when developing that one kind of smaller scope piece of software. So, for example, one module might be expecting another module to be performing a check that it relies on. And if you modify that and it no longer checks, you might see regressions in that affect the wider system. But then you might not identify them in that narrow scope release feature testing.
It's a common problem that we have, especially with heavy usage of things like open source and heavy usage of third-party libraries. It's becoming a software supply chain issue that you bring up, which is very valid too, because I think I agree with you. It's you have to figure out what the right balance is between doing feature testing and incremental testing, because just doing a holistic full test every time you have a change, it's probably not reasonable. But that's where making sure you understand the context of what the changes are and then be able to have heuristics that allow you to determine like what type of a test is needed. So if you just change the logo on your website or the color through style sheets on your website, that probably doesn't need a full thorough pen test. But all of a sudden, if you added PII data or financial transactions or created APIs that have sensitive data, that probably needs more focus and much deeper testing.
Yeah. So you've had a lot of experience both as a CISO and through your interaction with clients. What metrics have you found the most valuable in tracking the effectiveness of their security investments? How do you know if your security investments are working for you?
So it's a common question that I also like to ask other CISOs to understand what type of metrics they're capturing and understand how effective they are in them trying to maybe convey the message to the board or the executive leadership team. And one thing I've learned as I've had those discussions is that you often need to actually take a step back and frame up the broader picture of what you're truly trying to accomplish before you can actually go and build metrics and build data that give the answers that are going to be relevant and easily absorbed by the leadership team, and also for you to show that your investments are being effective. So when when building out a metrics program, there are a couple of different ways I think about it. First thing I like to think about is, how do I define what my risk management objectives are? Because those are going to be some of the things that I need to make sure that I can articulate effectively with the metrics that I'm going to capture. The second question that I ask is, what are the appropriate questions I should be asking? And what are the appropriate questions the leadership team or whoever I present this data to should be asking to be able to effectively manage risk? And the last thing is to be able to make sure that you're able to answer those questions based on your program itself. So, for example, if your program is heavily dependent on code review, then trying to build metrics and having risk management framework based on pen testing is probably not going to give you any value. So making sure that you truly understand what your program looks like and be able to make sure that you're asking questions based on the data that you're going to have based on your program is pretty appropriate. And then another thing I often see that's challenging or problematic, and I want to make sure we go through this because it's very important, is terminology. People often say that they're gathering metrics or they're presenting metrics, when in reality, what they're really presenting are measurements. And I want to define them clearly. A measurement is typically the value of a specific characteristics that's given to a certain entity, whereas a metric is some sort of an aggregation of one or more measurements to create something that gives you some level of business intelligence. So I'll use an example that I like to use because I feel like I may be addicted to coffee. Me going and telling someone that I had 4 cups of coffee today doesn't necessarily give you a proper piece of business intelligence. And I'll use business as my health as being the business here, let's say. Just because I had 4 cups of coffee, that's a measurement, that's not a metric. But if I told you that my blood caffeine percentage was a certain percentage, that now becomes a metric. And the fact that I had 4 cups of coffee, you don't know how big the coffee was, you don't know how small the coffee was, you don't know how big I am, how small I am, right? How my body metabolizes caffeine. You don't know any of those things. But if you get the metric, that gives you much more intelligent things that then can help you determine what my response needs to be. Am I overdoing it? Am I at a reasonable, healthy amount of caffeine intake per day or not? So that's kind of the difference there. And I often find people don't necessarily think about it that way, and they start taking measurements and try to make decisions when they really need to look at metrics and try to make decisions. So when it comes to metrics, in our context, some examples are things like, hey, what are the critical assets we are security testing today and that require security testing? Or what is my average cost to fix a vulnerability? Understanding things like, hey, what's the level of effort it takes to actually build an AppSec program? So those types of things that's taking different measurements and aggregating them to give you business intelligence are the type of things you need to make sure that you're getting metrics and you're able to measure the maturity of your program. And then once you have the right metrics, it also enables you to ask the right questions, because often what ends up happening is when you present the wrong metrics, people actually ask you the wrong questions. So if you're only sharing with your board, let's say, the number of vulnerabilities that you've discovered because of your investment in pen testing, and then the board asks you, well, how many vulnerabilities are our competitors discovering a year? And you get a different number that's completely different from what you guys are doing, then there may be a problem because your competitor may not be getting their numbers from pen testing. They may be getting their numbers from secure code review. And the number of findings you'll have will vary significantly because you're looking at things through a different lens. So if you want to make sure the right questions are being answered and the right questions are being asked by the executive leadership, you also have to get the right metrics to influence the program. And then, of course, once you have the metrics, then you can start showing trend over time to then show the overall health, maturity, and ultimately the return on investment with the metrics based on the investment you're making in your security program.
Yeah, I think there's a situation where you can go into measuring these things, thinking you know what you're doing, and by looking at the data, some of those intuitions pop out of the data, and you don't realize what you can learn or what type of questions you could be asking until you've started to dig into that data. So you might go in with one plan, learn a bunch of things for sure, but realize that some of those things have gaps and you should be asking different things, and you can redo and reapproach the questions that you're asking and the metrics that you come up with. So for cyber companies that use cyber insurance as their primary security investment, what do you think are some highlights and some lowlights that you see with that strategy?
So cyber insurance has become a significant part of just cybersecurity programs in general. And I think it just goes back to the concept of defense in depth. You can heavily invest in one thing, but not having a well-rounded program will typically lead you to challenges, especially when it comes to cyber insurance. I think cyber insurance is a very critical thing to have as part of your strategy, but also organizations need to understand that cyber insurance have limits. They have restrictions, they have limitations. Their coverage will also have limits. So you often don't know what type of a breach or outage you might have, that you may have to go get funding from your cyber insurance policy to help dig you out of it. And if there are limits on it, that might put you in a bind, especially if your breach or the cost of addressing whatever issue you're dealing with is way above that particular insurance limit. Now, the cyber insurance providers have become really, really helpful in a lot of scenarios, like when people get attacked by ransomware, for example, or people have different types of outages and crisis situations, because they often actually have partnerships with providers. They have relationships with entities that can come in and help with forensics, that can come in and help with negotiations with the ransomware actor. They have playbooks and runbooks that they can come and help you execute in the situation of a business continuity issue. So those things I think are really valuable, especially if you're working with a cyber insurance provider. And then, of course, when you work with a cyber insurance provider, they also have partnerships with other vendors where you can get a lot of products and services, sometimes for free at no cost because you are getting cyber insurance from that provider. Or you have partnerships with pen testing providers like we do with various cyber insurance organizations, where we offer preferred pricing because you're getting your cyber insurance from that particular insurance company. So having access to those types of things, I think, is really important. And actually, cyber insurance providers can add a lot of value to help you improve the maturity of your program, because they also have strategic partnerships and relationships that are at your disposal now because you're using them as a cyber insurance provider.
Awesome. So let's dig into a hot topic, a bit of a trending topic. What are your thoughts on utilizing automation and or AI, artificial intelligence, to enhance the ROI of security investments? Do you think there are any specific pitfalls or benefits there?
So if I was building a new cybersecurity initiative from scratch, I'd get brought in to build a cybersecurity program. the first thing I would invest in would not be automation or AI. The first thing I would invest in would be people and the culture. I think ultimately having the right people and the right culture goes a lot farther than just trying to solve problems with technology. And when it comes to I have an opinion that may be unpopular with many folks. I actually think the term AI is a misnomer. The having the word intelligence or intelligence in any technology gives you a sense of sentience when I think about it. And most AI based systems are not sentient. We're not quite there yet. We have a long way to go before we get there. But it's still mathematics, algorithms. It's just a software that does things a little differently than traditional software that we're used to. So, because it's not intelligent, there's a lot of other things you have to do to make sure you're deploying some of the cutting edge AI based technology and LLMs in a secure fashion. And that requires having proper data hygiene, proper data classification and inventory, proper standards and policies around how you're going to train the model and what you're going to do with it, having the right types of governance and contractual obligations with the providers for LLMs and models in case there's a breach or something goes wrong as you're using them. So there are a lot of basics that need to go around and be done correctly before you can safely deploy AI-based technology, especially if you're training that model with your own data. And if you can deploy AI insecurely if you want, and just like any system, you can deploy insecurely, but doing it properly requires many of the basics that are part of just basic cybersecurity practices to be under control before you can do it safely. So that's kind of my thought on AI and automation. I think AI and automation are necessary. I think automation is necessary to be able to properly scale any program, but if you want to do it safely, you have to start building a proper culture and build out a roadmap for how you are going to build a mature cybersecurity initiative and then implement accordingly based on your business objectives.
Interesting. So this is going to be my last question for you, Nabil, and I want to end today by getting some advice. Aside from tracking metrics, which we've already said might not fully demonstrate the ROI of your security investments, what actionable advice can you offer cybersecurity leaders to determine the ROI of their current security investments, and what strategies or best practices would you recommend?
So let me get this started by saying you can't improve something if you don't know what you have to improve. And in order to do that, you have to measure and you need to make sure you know how you're measuring things with metrics to be able to show the return on investment that you're making. So if you don't measure something, you can't really improve it or even know how you're improving it. That being said, I think just focusing on metrics should not be a priority up front. I know many organizations are very data driven and they make data driven decisions. But if you're starting a program and don't have enough maturity, often the right data is not available. So you have to start making decisions based on risk and also based on understanding the overall business context and objectives. So what I typically say is start with building a culture of security. Make sure you're getting the right people in the right place with a security mindedness that aligns with the business objectives of your business. Second, you have to understand that your security cannot be a blocker. It needs to become a business enabler, and you have to enable the business to be safe. So understanding your business, and a mentor told me this in a very simple way, but I think it hit the message home for me, is follow the money. Figure out how the business is actually sustained. What does your business do to make money? Or what does your business do to be successful? Once you have a proper understanding of that, then you need to tailor your cybersecurity initiative to be able to support that particular business. If you're just building a cybersecurity initiative and becoming a blocker, you're going to struggle to get investments. You're going to struggle to build a proper culture. You're going to struggle to actually build partnerships across the organization. So we've seen a big shift in that trend. Before, I think security teams used to be just the team that comes and says no to things, whereas now they've become a company that, or become an organization that comes and says yes, but here are some things we need to address first. So becoming a business enabler is key. And then ultimately, as you mature your program, hopefully you have the right data to be able to make the right data-driven decisions and make sure you can actually demonstrate that your investments are actually yielding the right returns.
Awesome. Nabil, thanks for joining me today. It's been such an awesome chat, and I really hope our audience has enjoyed it as much as I have. If anybody has some follow-ups or wants to discuss any of these challenges in more depth, feel free to connect with myself or Nabil on LinkedIn, and we'd love to chat more. Thanks, everybody.